Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, and we've created a platform to help alumni to network and connect through their affinity groups, whether it's athletes with other athletes, whether it's college alumni, could be business alumni association. But we've created this show to teach and inspire athletes that there is life after sports. It's a major issue today with between mental health and financial literacy. And we interview former collegiate professional athletes and get their stories and hopefully to inspire some of these athletes and to make an impact in their lives. Today, we're really excited. We have Jeff Byers. How you doing today, Jeff?
Very good. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, so Jeff is he played college football at USC, and we joked around about this the other day. So it's University of Southern California. There's some other schools that use USC, but they're the USC Trojans. And then he went on to have a career in the NFL with Carolina Panthers, and then got out once he had retired from football, got into the biotech space, and ultimately he's now the CEO of Momentous. So what we're going to do, Jeff, I always talk about when you're playing sports growing up, how did that shape you leading up into high school and ultimately college?
Right. I mean, I think sports is a really sports or any kind of extracurricular activity is a great teaching bed for a lot of the really important life lessons, right? It teaches you how to deal with winning, losing, adversity. It teaches you how to work with people, be a teammate. And it really teaches you, right, like commitment, right? Whether you're playing sports or a musical instrument or anything, it takes real commitment to be good. And it's like that in anything in life. Like if you want to be good at anything, it takes commitment and a lot of dedication. So, I mean, sports to me have been very integral into everything that I've done in my life. And, obviously played the sports as a young kid and was really blessed to continue to play sports at a very, very high level. But it's quite a fascinating journey of what sports can do for you. And, I think every day, the decisions I make, how I make decisions, how I respond to winning and losing comes a lot with how I was, how I grew up in sports.
Yeah, and I think that's key. We're going to cover that later because it's a lot of times we talk about the DNA of an athlete and just everything that you kind of bring to the table, especially once you're out and finished with your career. So when you were growing up, did you want to be a professional athlete?
Yeah. I mean, I think like most kids, I dreamed of being a professional athlete or a professional of something, whether that's, an actor or a, musician or a athlete, whatever it is, like a professional, like to be the peak. And definitely I was a huge basketball fan growing up. And so not necessarily, I mean, love the game of football, but I love basketball, and probably because I grew up in the Chicago area, like in my really like elementary formative years outside of Chicago with the '90s Bulls, and it's like hard not to be a Michael Jordan '90s Bulls fan when you're a kid of that era.
Yeah, that definitely plays. In fact, I always joke around and I say that I want to be a Major League Baseball player. Unfortunately, talent wasn't there, so here I am doing what I do today.
Mhm.
So let's fast forward. So we'll now when you're in college, one of the things we talk about in this whole athlete transition out of sports is the education side of it. And I know, like you and me, you were at school a little while back. I'm sure things might have changed. So was there education around athletes, across all sports at USC, talking about things that to look out for in the future?
I mean, there's definitely, NSC, obviously we are a really good academic institution and have had we have a lot of resources to bear. But I would say one of the big things is you have to have a willing kid to be able to take advantage of those resources. And they can be the best resources around, but if you don't have the right DNA and you haven't taught the kids from right when they're getting recruited in, here are the resources, here's how we help you, and then continue to indoctrinate them about life after sports. It doesn't matter how great your resources are if you can't convince, and if the coaching staffs aren't involved and aren't supportive of it as well. It needs to be a cross spectrum. So at USC, we obviously have we had great resources when I was there. They're even better now when you think about that, but still the same challenges exist today as they did a decade ago and 2 decades ago. And it's really that challenge is how do we communicate to the student athlete that they are a student as well, and provide them not with just the right resources, but with the right mental state and attitude to go in to say, hey, there's going to be life after ball, life after X. And it doesn't start in day one. It starts, in the recruitment process, most likely, in my perspective, and how we recruit athletes and how we reward the athletes that care about that as well. But also, how do you get them in the system right away and continue to think about life after sport? But then it's the coaching staff, it's the other people around the team that it's just like, oh, you're not in your little athlete bubble, you're in this bubble as a whole. And it's hard, right? Like I probably failed at it initially as an athlete, right? Coming in as a true freshman, and you just get, like, as a football player, you have these grand dreams of what you're going to do in school, and life after doesn't necessarily always take the right path or the right priority.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things you said there too, I guess, obviously it's up to the athlete as well. I mean, if the resources are there and they're not necessarily utilizing, not purposely, just because of, the time and you kind of zoned into your sport. I had one guy I was talking to, one of our previous podcasts, and he talked about, he said it would have been great if he had maybe like a 4-week workshop or like a semester where athletes were kind of almost forced to take this, and it covered all the different, the mental health and the financial literacy and networking, connecting, career services and things like that. And he said it would have made more of an impact if he had something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back, like all those things, again, to me, it's the willingness of it. And I think it really is, I think about the football program and what that is. If the coaches push it, it's going to work, right? And if the coaches aren't bought in and the staffs aren't bought in to what it is, then it's going to struggle. I think other sports are actually way more progressive, open about it, because there's not as clean of a pipeline, right? Like, and then in college football, right? Like, it is life, right? If you're a college football player, and if you're a men's or women's soccer player, it's a little different, right? Like, most of my perspective is most athletes in other sports are way more oriented towards academia and understand that there is something after sport. And I think in my sport, there's a lot of blinders that get put on.
Right.
And it's like, life is football, football is life. And that mentality has to be changed, but it has to be changed in all sports, because like, people fall through the cracks in all places. But I do believe, right, like, if it's a 4-week workshop or whatever it may be, it is make sure that you have the right resources in place, and make sure that the people who influence these kids are the ones that are promoting it and sharing stories and sharing why it's so important that these things are being done. And it's not just, the academic, student athlete academic services centers and things like that. They're saying these are great. Those people mean nothing to an athlete, realistically, unless they are being supported and promoted by the coaching staffs and the people higher up in the org.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Another area that we talk about a lot is alumni engagement. And so kind of, I'm going to hit this in a couple areas with you. So I guess we'll take two parts. One, when you were there at USC, as far as other alumni coming in, and then we'll cover the future after that. So when you were there, and people always talk about alumni coming back for golf tournaments, different things like that. But was there alumni involvement encouraged by the school? And did they come back to not just to like talk to you guys, but I mean mentor and talk about careers, possibly jobs?
Yeah, I think USC is super unique in that sense that have a very deep alumni base, and pretty prominent, both from a professional athlete, Olympian standpoint, but also just a very good feeder into kind of life for sports or business, et cetera. And so there was a lot of access, a ton of access. I don't know, and being based in LA, like, there's millions and millions of people. There's no like shortage of opportunities or people to talk to. There were always people around, and ability to take advantage of that. Now, whether people did or not, is another story. But from my perspective, I felt like I always had access to both former athletes, but also just people that were have been successful that came out of USC in a very meaningful way. And that could be, CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, executives or whatnot. I felt like we had a tremendous access as athletes. But again, it comes down to does that athlete want to take advantage of it or not? Because as an athlete, you have way more access than when you're not. And the second you're not an athlete, a lot of your access leaves. And so one of the things I learned really early on was you can take advantage of that, and you can build really deep networks before you walk away from a game or a sport, et cetera. And I think that's a really important mentality to have, is when you have the access, you got to take advantage of it, and you have to build that network, because once you walk away, leave sport, access becomes a little harder. And people really want to help and support while you're an athlete. So yeah, I mean, we had tremendous access. USC is a unique one on that, and I would say it's still not perfect from any sense, but I do believe there's a lot. USC is unique in that sense, just because like the Trojan family, but where it's located, right, and just the willingness of that academic base to give back.
Right. No, that's and I think that the one thing that you really hit on, which I talk about, is that you took advantage of it, and knowing networking while you're still playing, getting to know people, because that's one of the things we talked about. I was talking to an agent, and he said the best time for players to be networking is when they're still playing. And he said, unfortunately, a lot of players fail to do that. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is great advice to athletes, is that, take advantage of your network, whether it is other athlete alumni or whether it's just alumni in general. And I think even starting like in high school, I mean, just, getting to know people and be willing to do that.
Yeah, 100%. It's this sports don't define me, I define me, and making sure that sports is a part of us, but it's never the sole thing that defines any human. And it's a little shift in mentality, and it's very hard, especially when you're a collegiate athlete and performing at a very high level, that you don't let that sport define you in a major way. Like, it needs to shape you, but it can't be you. And we as athletes really identify as athletes, and that's our only identity, and that it hinders some of our ability to go do some of these other things, and take advantage of the access when we have it, and give back, and focus on school and things like that. And we all have inflection points in our lives that require, or that shift us, right? Some of us have really interesting inflection points super young that allow us to realize, oh, there is life after ball, in my words. And then some people don't realize that shift till they're done and retired. And it's a hard shift regardless of when it happens. Sometimes you're forced to give up a sport younger than you want. Sometimes you're forced to like have an epiphany of like, oh man, I need to take things seriously because I can see how sport can be taken away from me. And other times is you walk away from the game and you're like, now what? Because you've thought about it for so long, and that was your focus. But it's really, I think that's what's so important, is if we can get the people, that these young kids are looking up to, these 18 to 22-year-olds, right? In their formative years, to like say, this is important, right? Having alumni come back that have been very successful, that have transitioned out well or not well, right? And have the coaching staffs and these performance staffs support it, not just the academic staff, right? It is, they need, as an 18-year-old kid, you need to be able to see yourself in somebody, and you need to be able to see what that future could look like. Both, here's the ultimate success path that you could take, but also here is the path that is as likely or more likely that you probably will take. and understand those are the different inflection points and what little things can you do now, and then make sure that there's space given to you, that athlete, by a coaching staff. Because I assume almost all universities have really good, student athlete academic services programs and things like that. Maybe they aren't doing an awesome job bringing alumni back in, but they can and they should, right? You got to have the resources, right? And then you got to be able to give them the space and invest in that and encourage that. It just can't be, here are the resources, go figure it out, right? Not one 18-year-old kid figured it out. They might all raise their hands and say they figured it out, but very few have ever figured it out. Like, I'm still trying to figure it out. You're still trying to figure it out in this thing called life. So,
Yeah, no, that's for sure. So was there, just curious from the NFL perspective, is there, I mean, I know there's, NFL alumni and there's players association, all that, but is there a push towards the education at the NFL level? And if so, is it taken advantage of by some of the players, or just kind of, I guess, player by player?
it's definitely player by player. I mean, there are great resources to bear. They really are. They've invested heavily in it. But again, it comes down to the player. It comes down to the athlete and whether you choose to take advantage of that or not. Like, for instance, I don't leverage very many alumni services at all, right? And that's just kind of where I am in my career, and where I was when I left. Like, when I retired from the NFL, when I walked away from the game, I had my master's already. And I knew what I was going to do. I had a long-standing job offer, which it turned out what I didn't want to do, but ended up getting into the area and what I was really passionate about. But I was set up a little differently, where it's like, hey, continuing education. Like, I had my MBA from USC, and it's like I didn't need additional that, but I did use some of the money that they had for continuing ed, but they have great workshops, et cetera. But again, it comes down to the player. And I will say, in the NFL, it's like, the PA comes in, the Players Association comes in and is like, hey, you should be taking advantage of this. And, 50% of the guys are sleeping, 50% of the guys are interested. And it just, where guys are in their life, what they've seen, et cetera, it has, like, doesn't matter what college you went to, like, you could go down and be like, you would never be able to pick if you just looked in the room who it was. But it all is circumstances, because everybody has a jolt. Maybe they tore their ACL last year and it was like, oh man, I got to get ready for what's next. Or maybe one of their friends retired last year and really struggled, and they're like, hey, take advantage of it. And maybe they just, they're fat, happy, and, don't think any of that will happen to them. They're going to make $100 million and never have to do a thing in their life. And so it's really interesting where it falls and how people do it. But there are great resources to bear that. I mean, the NFL Players Association and the NFL in general has a great system. But I will say the biggest thing in the NFL is the access you have to people, network, et cetera. Like, you can build such a strong relationship of humans, and you can actually do a lot of goodwill in the world too, around that. But it's, how do you leverage that and, like, start to find what people do you want to be associated with, what people don't you, because a lot of people want to be associated with you at that time.
Right.
And it's just kind of leveraging that to your benefit, is an incredibly valuable asset that a lot of pro football players don't get right. Because very few people retire from the NFL and have, like, a recognizable name that's still going to be able to get them places.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time. I mean, it's one thing if you're Tom Brady, or some of these other, well-known names, but you're right. I think it's but the key, I guess, to your point, is just taking advantage of it. So, whether it's the college time, whether it's coming out as a professional athlete, that's pretty critical. So let's talk about the hot topic today, of NIL, name, image, likeness. And I know when you were playing, it didn't exist, or sometimes we say it existed in a different format, a different way. But talk about your thoughts, both positive and negative.
Yeah, I mean, I have some old school thoughts here on it, but ultimately I think it can be really impactful for the student athlete. My biggest fear is, how do we think about NIL affecting right, like creating bigger haves and have nots in the NCAA. And when I think about what NIL has the potential to do, it has the potential to leave a lot of sports on the back foot and then put a few on the front foot and create this bigger separation. But I also think if done right, we can really enhance athletes across the university by creating equal opportunities for all student athletes to get a lift in here. So NIL is really, to me, it's a very it's a bit Wild West. Is definitely getting transformed, and I think some universities are doing a really incredible job at it around how do we make sure we resource athletes appropriately and not just a very small portion of them in there. And I think that is the challenge, right? Like one of the things yet to be seen is, hey, if there's $20 million going into NIL at USC, as an example, used by alma mater, is that $20 million less that's going into the athletic department? And if that's $20 million less going to the athletic department, guess what they're not doing? They're not cutting the football budget. They're not probably cutting the basketball budget. They're probably cutting all the other budgets, right? And that has a very big impact when I think about what does that mean for college athletics? Because yes, football makes money. Yes, basketball makes money at a lot of programs, but the rest of the sports, right? It's not that's not the point of the NCAA and collegiate athletics, right? It is right. It is a student athlete. You have all of these, and if we start taking away resources from men's and women's volleyball, or men's and women's swimming, or men's baseball, women's softball, at a lot of these programs, right? Like a couple $100,000 is meaningful. And if it's a $20 million spread, like that $20 million is going away from somewhere, right? Like athletic departments run a budget, right? And if you're $20 million under budget, money is going to be stripped from somewhere, and it's not going to be stripped from football, most likely, and probably not from men's basketball. And therefore, I think it's an incredible disservice. Now, don't know if that's happening. Don't know if that's going to happen. That's one of my hypotheses that it could happen, right? Like if, me as an alumni own a business, I'm going to give $1 million a year to the school, or I'm going to give $1 million a year to NIL, right? Maybe it's not, maybe I give two. I don't know. Don't know what that fits. So I have some fear around that because I think that's real. And then I think really when it comes down to how are we buying players, it's become this massive free agency play, which I think is it can create challenges, right? And I think there's other rules like you don't have to sit out a year to transfer, but I don't love the aspect of the free agency that has become collegiate sports and how that is like, obviously worked very well for my alma mater in the past year as Lincoln Riley came in and was able to bring in and like really transform the team and the talent in that team. But I think that has a challenge when you think about how do you think about loyalty, and then how do you think about some of these lower level teams, not perennial top 10, top 15 teams. They have a good player or two, right? They're just going to get recruited to the best. And they're just, again, how do you think about this gap widening in terms of the haves and have nots? If USC can pay, the top defensive lineman $3 million on NAL, but that top defensive lineman was at Ball State, right? Like he's not staying at Ball State. He's going to USC next year. And what does that do to Ball State? It creates a lot of challenges. Anyways, but I do worry about what it does to the equality in sports, men's and women particularly. I think it's a tremendous thing for athletes. I just want to I just believe it needs to be done the right way. And some programs, right, are using it to help walk-ons, right? Some programs are using it to, get athletes across their entire org deals of like, hey, how do you get an extra $100 in your pocket every month? And I think those are really meaningful things as you think across it. And I also think some of these bigger players that are striking some of these deals have the ability to influence some of that and be like, hey, yeah, I'll take $1 million, but what if we gave everybody in the entire athletic department X or Y? And I think I think there's some really cool things that can happen as well. And these, obviously, we're also teaching these players how to responsibly go build a brand, or not responsibly. But I think it can teach really great life lessons here. So anyways, NIL is Wild West. We've done some work as a company in NIL, and really thinking about how do we make sure we're doing NIL right, as well. Like, for us, democratizing high performance is a big mission of our business. And like, that means spreading it out as well.
Right, and that's great. I think this spread out, because I could see, and maybe just kind of a follow up. Do you see like any animosity towards teammates, like where you've got this one, one or two teammates you're making all this money through NIL and the rest of the team isn't?
I don't know. Me as a player, don't care, right? Like, me, like, always want the best to get paid. Like, right? Like, you want your top guys and you want your top performers to always have access, and to be happy. And there might be some, to me, I think it's more if there starts to be a separation of, oh, look at what they get versus what they like, if it actually starts taking away from people rather than value add. Like, hey, I don't care if somebody else is getting paid as long as I'm not getting something taken away from. Like, if I have to take a step back, that's the challenge, right? Like, if you're requiring other programs and other people to move backwards in their ability to perform or the compensation or whatever they're getting, then I think that's a problem. As long as you're staying on a level playing field and these people are moving forward because of their skills and their ability, totally fine with that. But my fear is, right, if people are getting paid really handsomely for what they do and what they should be getting paid, but then it's taking away some of these other student athletes' abilities, then I think it's a problem. I don't think that's happening. I think it's too early to understand
Yeah,
what does the giving cycles look like, because there's so many macro trends and the environment plays a fact into how people give and that as well.
yeah,
I also,
you're right.
yeah,
There's a lot to it, and I think even on the side of from an education standpoint, and the big thing is the financial literacy, just like for these athletes to know what they need to do and that they got to pay tax and do other things. That's usually the big thing that when I ask that question, a lot of the time comes across is that what do they do and do they know what to do with it? So let's switch gears and let's talk about transitioning out of sports. So you've faced it twice in a sense. So I want to kind of hear like you're transitioning out of college football into the NFL, and then ultimately transitioning out of the NFL and into what you do today.
yeah. I would say I had a really unique situation, as a really young collegiate athlete. I started as a true freshman on a national championship team, and I blew my hip out and ended up having 2 hip surgeries and 2 back surgeries post my freshman year. And so I missed my whole second year and my whole third year, from an athlete perspective. And I also, had really good, a pretty blessed family situation in terms of like we cared about, they really pushed academics and such. So I took school very seriously after my freshman year, after I got hurt, and was kind of at a pivotal moment. Was told by a doc that, hey, I'd probably never play again. If I did, it would be a very different player, and should have lower expectations on my ability. And went to the dean of the business school and was basically like, all right, I'm here. What am I going to do? So I graduated undergrad in 3 years, got accepted into the Marshall School of Business, essentially as a 21-year-old, and then got my MBA while I was still under scholarship. And so when I was done playing football at USC, I also got my MBA in that fall. And so always had, I had a really unique, side shock, right? I had this inflection point young, right? That was like, football is getting taken away from me. What the hell do I do? And was lucky to leverage the network at USC, et cetera, and have a very strong academic institution to fall on, and people, and support and resources to help me. Anyway, so did that. So I always and the former dean of the business school at USC kind of made me do a deal with him. And he said, "Why do you want to go play in the NFL?" And I said, "Well, I was a boy. I dreamt of being a professional athlete." But it wasn't a don't go. It was a you've sacrificed a lot to be able to get your master's and all of this. What are you going to do to make sure that when you retire from the NFL, that you didn't make right? You didn't do all this sacrifice for nothing, right? And that was a really interesting thing, right? And I kind of made a commitment. Hey, I'll stay relevant, right? I'll try my best to do as much as I can so that when I retire, I'm ready to go, right? And I've taken advantage of my MBA and my academic education. So, anyways, transitioning from college to the NFL, I mean, honestly, it's hard, right? I mean, you go from being, a college athlete, kind of running the show as an old guy on a campus, to in the mix, and I call it grown ass men. And I was an older rookie, but you're playing with 35-year-olds that, right, have been doing this, a long time, at that level. And, just what's the routine? How do you make space and time? But also, how do you think about the future was something very important to me. So transition was, right. Sport is sport. I mean, obviously the level of play is very different, and incredibly hard. And it is like in football, in college, you might not be playing, but you most likely are still at that university, unless you do something really bad. In the NFL, you're gone. Right. And they rotate people out, and you see people move a lot. And I got cut twice in my NFL career, which was short, not long at all. I played for 4 years. I practiced for a lot of those, and played for a little bit of those. And so, yeah, the transition is very different and very hard. I think it is, whether you're, a journeyman like me, or if you're a superstar, right? And money, financial literacy, but also fame and all of that make it incredibly challenging to transition out, and to make sure you keep a level head and understand what's really important to you, both short and long term, is really, really important.
Yeah. No, and then how about once you when you finish playing the NFL? So I mean, in your case, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, you had just the great education behind you, and you were ready to go. And like you said, I think it sounds like they kind of prepped at USC too. It's just like, okay, life after sports, you're ready to go. So any advice that you would give to athletes on either side of it, coming out, transitioning out of college, or fellow professional athletes?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people do is like, oh, I'm going to take my time and transition. I actually think I don't believe in that. I believe you got to jump in. And as athletes, you're always used to doing and experiencing and learning, right? And the more gap you have from, right, having real sense of accountability and doing, and then actually having accountability and sense of doing, I think is a struggle. Now, very few things are you going to jump into and you're going to love, right? And some of it you have to realize, like, what is it that I love? What is it that I don't? Because we as athletes need to fill a gap, right? And the biggest, hardest challenge from not being an athlete, from being an athlete to not being an athlete, is how do you fill that void that being an athlete led? And I believe we have to find that. And the longer it takes to find, it's actually the harder. The longer we take off, the harder it can be to find. So I think you need to jump into something, and knowing that something might not be it. But you have to really say, what do I love? What's really important to me? Right. And know your why. And I call it your purpose, or your why. And then you need to go find it. Right. And it's okay to jump into something, realize you don't want it, and jump into something else, as well. And this isn't like fine, but you need to find what fits your why. Right. And it's going to take time as well. And I think the other thing from an athlete perspective that is incredibly hard is a lot of athletes go from being, right, the top of their game. And then when you get into business, right, it's an evolution. Like, you're starting again, and like Pop Warner football or like, right? Like you
Point.
got to learn those skills, but you have an advantage. Athletes have an advantage where they can jump a lot faster than most people. And you have to think about, well, what do I want to do in 20 years? What's going to be important? And it's having that mindset. And how do I make diligent progress and have an open conversation and dialogue? So I think it's important to jump into something, realize that it might not be right. I did it, right? Like I had a longstanding job offer in finance, right? In essentially my entire NFL career. I jumped into it and I realized really quickly that this is not what I wanted to do long term in my life. And it wasn't because I couldn't make a lot of money, could make a ton of money. It wasn't because I didn't like the people I was working with, right? It was because it did not fill the void that I had, right, in me of like what I loved about sport and what I loved about my last, 15 years was I love this incredible sense of accountability, right? This building teams, having real stress, right? Real fear, in me around like I want to perform and I want to be the best. I want to build and I want to take risk. I want to, and so for me, it was finding what was really important to me. And what I found was that was like early stage building a business, growing a business, and leading a business, right? Is what I really wanted to do. And it wasn't just, hey, I can make a lot of money in finance and build a small team. Like I wanted to build a team. I wanted to think about right. I wanted to think about taking chances and having a really deep sense of accountability, not necessarily just being right a piece and doing the same thing every day. Right. That wasn't what I wanted. Some people love that. But it wasn't me. And it took me a little bit to figure it out. So I think it's important to jump in, right? Test your strength, test your muscle. Like, what do you want to do? Figure it out. And you don't necessarily do that sitting on the sidelines, right? You do that being in the game. And I think it's really important to go test that. And hopefully, as an athlete, you were able to leverage summer internships or job shadowing or any of that while you were still playing. So you have a sense of like, this is the area. You're not like huge wide aperture, but a little bit narrow, and you're just kind of navigating within that. But I do believe it's jump into the deep end, right? If you're not in the game, you're not in the game, and you never know. You're like, until you get into something, you will never know if it's a good or a bad fit. You won't, right? And then you got to know your why. Like, what do you love? And maybe you just want to make a good life, right? And coach high school sports. Maybe you want to be something different, or like what you want to chase. You truly want to try to be the best, and it like, or you want to be a CEO, or you don't. Like, it's not for everybody, right? And so I think it's finding out like, what do you love? Jump in, go figure it out, start navigating, play the game, and that's the only way you're going to get in. But you don't learn or you don't know from the sidelines.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, I think the key there is with two things. One, the passion, and then also, like you said, let's just get off the sidelines. And I think that I had one gentleman was ultimately was the CEO for two successful Fortune 500 companies, and he implored athletes to use that skill set that he just focused on there. So let's talk about what you're doing today. So I mean, well, you won finance, but ultimately getting in and the CEO of Momentous. Talk about Momentous, and I always joke around. So this is kind of like your corporate commercial here, but I know you're doing a lot of great things for athletes, helping them out. So tell us that story.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of a company called Momentous. We're a leading nutrition supplementation company. We work with 200 pro and college sports teams. We've won 10 government Department of Defense innovation contracts, and we have a very large consumer business as well now, where we sell direct to consumer, et cetera. And we really, our consumer business is focused on what we call life optimization. And so we think about 4 key pillars of optimization. 1 is sleep, 2 is athletic, 3 is cognitive, and 4 is what we call health span, which is really right general wellness. And it's kind of the catch-all bucket. But we've taken a very different approach in this space and trying to be the supplement brand. And how do we work with experts and the practitioners and really lead with them and say, let's build a curated portfolio of products and create education and guidance around that. And so been a really fun journey. We've worked with some of the best minds in the world. Very blessed to be in that. I'm very passionate about high performance, not from just from an athlete perspective, but from a life perspective. It's something that, post NFL career, I jumped into early stage biotech after finance, and really that biotech kind of spun us into this business 5 years ago, where it was, how do we build the next generation, the next great high performance company, right? The next gen high performance company, and nutrition and supplementation is very much at its core in an industry, in a space that's that has a lot of charlatans. And how do we bring science and data and experts and guidance to light rather than just be like everybody else? It needs a big shift, because one of the things I saw as an elite athlete is you had access to the best practitioners, you had access to the best products, right? And all of that was kind of led by experts in science. But when I left the NFL, I couldn't find any of that. I didn't know where to go, right? You talk to your buddies, you Google search, and it's like, how do you get through this sea of craziness? And that is really one of the big genesis for what is Momentous and why do we work with who we work with.
That's great. And so you said it's direct consumer as well. So is it something that's sold retail, or is it all online?
We're mostly like, we're 90% online and Amazon. Essentially, we have our websites, livemomentous.com, and then same on Amazon essentially.
Okay, great. And then you sell, and you said, like, directly to sports teams as well, which is great.
Yeah, that's a really strong part of our business, and we've had a lot of success with that. We have really great connections and relationships in that space, but it's really where we built the business before we transformed it into a direct-to-consumer business.
Gotcha. So you mentioned your website. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me LinkedIn. It's only social media. We are, and the company is Live Momentous on most social media channels as well.
Great. And I always joke around about it, because I'm like, it's old school saying, give me like www dot. But
Yeah.
no, we'll have all this in the show notes. And Jeff, this has been great speaking with you. You can find us on alumnidirect.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and follow the show. I mean, we're on our YouTube channel, as well as across all the different podcast networks. But I think this is a major issue today, and it's inspiring as I continue to talk more and more athletes and hear their story, and we really want to make an impact. So definitely like and follow us on these different channels. So thanks again, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Grace. See you, Rob.
Take care.